Welcome to another episode of Capital Cannabis. I'm your host, Kimberly Krepp, where we the people demand that cannabis be exempted from the DEA's Controlled Substances Act and all federal, state, and local criminal and civil penalties for the plant called cannabis be repealed. Thanks for watching the show. Got a nice episode today, but before I get started into that, I wanted to give a shout out to the fans that caught me in Walmart the other day. Good luck with your YouTube show. Once you get it together, hit me up. I'll bring you up on the show, give you some air time. All right, so one of the favorite things that I like to talk about is drug trafficking and things like that. So today we're going to start off with, and sorry about this, I couldn't print out my episode because we don't have Wi-Fi in the studio today. Little technical problems but we overcome. So let's get it started. The CIA has been trafficking heroin and cocaine nationally for decades while busting the little guy. Fat cat politicians are extolling front-page, multi-million-dollar drug busts while they are the ones secretly facilitating the supply of drugs to the inner city, which are destroying entire communities, families, and lives through addiction, poverty, and crime. So let's bring it back to the early 80s and 90s to a man named Rick Ross, a little thing called the Iran Contra Affair, and a reporter named Gary Webb. Long before Jamal Khashoggi, there was a Gary Webb. Gary Webb was a reporter best known for his Dark Alliance series that appeared in the San Jose Mercury News in 1996, examining the origins of the crack cocaine trade in Los Angeles, while claiming that members of the anti-communist Contra rebels in Nicaragua played a major role in the trade and were using cocaine profits to support their cause. It was suggested that the Contras may have acted with the knowledge and protection of the CIA. Supporters point to the results of a later CIA investigation vindicating the series. Rick Ross, for those who really don't know, is not a rapper. However, there is a former correctional officer who uses that name as a claim to fame and street credit for his rap career, but he's just an imposter. The real Rick Ross established one of the biggest cocaine empires in Los Angeles from the early 80s to the mid-90s. In fact, he pretty much introduced crack to South Central and started the whole crack epidemic. Originally, Rick Ross, he wanted to go to college, and he was trying to get a college scholarship for tennis, but was unable to get the scholarship due to his illiteracy. He was unable to read or write. He became a small-time coke hustler. After some time, he was introduced to Oscar Danilo Blandon, a Nicaraguan exile and cocaine distributor, and later to Blandon's distributor, Norwin Meneses Canatero. Blandon was originally a director of agricultural markets in Nicaragua during the government of Anastasio Somoza. When Somoza was overthrown in 1979, Blandon fled to the United States and began to raise money for the Nicaraguan Democratic Force, a Contra group. Blandon began to sell cocaine, becoming a major trafficker in the Los Angeles area. After being arrested in 1996 on federal charges of conspiracy to possess cocaine with intent to distribute, he began to cooperate with the DEA in a number of drug cases. In his plea deal, Blandon agreed to continue to cooperate with the DEA for a sentence reduction. Following his early release, Blandon worked for the DEA as a confidential informant and set up Rick Ross in a sting operation in 1997. Ross was able to purchase large amounts of cocaine from Blandon at significantly lower prices than anyone else, and he became the main distributor for the Bloods and Crips. By 1982, Ross stated himself that he had not only operated out of South Central, but also cities such as St. Louis, New Orleans, Kansas City, Baltimore, Seattle, Cleveland, and other states such as Texas, Oklahoma, Indiana, North Carolina, and South Carolina. He claimed that he sold up to $3 million in cocaine daily while purchasing a minimum of 450 kilos a week. According to reports between 1982 and 1989, federal prosecutors estimated Ross brought and resold several metric tons of cocaine, estimating his gross sales to exceed $900 million, with a profit of nearly $300 million. Allegedly, Ross invested a portion of the proceeds in Anita Baker's first album, which actually was a really great album. I love Anita Baker, just to say. So in 1996, Ross was sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of purchasing 100 kilos from a federal agent in a sting operation. Later that year, the Dark Alliance series of articles by Gary Webb revealed a connection between Danilo Blandon and the CIA as part of the Iran Contra Affair. Later, after learning how to read in prison and researching into law, Ross was able to identify discrepancies in his case and filed an appeal, which resulted in his life sentence to being reduced to 20 years, which is very important to be able to learn to read, write, and understand. You have to read the law books. Well, what is the Iran Contra Affair, you say? Well, I'm here to tell you. After Iranian students stormed the embassy and took 52 Americans as hostages in 1979, the Carter administration imposed an arms embargo on Iran. An arms embargo is a restriction or set of sanctions that applies only to weaponry and can serve different purposes, such as disapproval of a behavior by a certain actor, to maintain neutrality in ongoing conflicts, or to limit the ability to inflict violence on others, and even to weaken a country's military capabilities before foreign intervention. The United States was the largest supplier of arms to Iran. Iran was invaded by Iraq in 1980, and to maintain the weapons, Iran needed access to spare parts to replace or repair their worn-out weapons. Reagan took office in 1981 and vowed to continue Carter's policy on blocking the sale of arms to Iran on the grounds that Iran supported terrorism and that the Ayatollah Khomeini's openly declared goal of an Islamic revolution with the intent of overthrowing the governments of Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and other states around the Persian Gulf. At the same time, a group of senior Reagan administration officials in the Senior Interdepartmental Group conducted a secret study indicating the embargo was ineffective, as Iran could buy American parts anywhere, and if the United States did not supply them, then the Kremlin would. The report concluded that the United States should start selling arms as soon as it was politically possible to keep Iran from falling under Soviet influence. At the same time, the United States government was considering selling arms to Iran. Contra militants based in Honduras were waging a guerrilla war to end the Sandinista National Front, which was the revolutionary government of Nicaragua. A major goal of Reagan administration was the overthrow of the left-wing Sandinista government and to support the Contra rebels. The official justification for the arms shipments to Iran was that it was part of an operation to free 7 American hostages still held in Lebanon by Hezbollah. The plan was for Israel to ship weapons to Iran, for the U.S. to resupply Israel, and for Israel to pay the United States. Israel was interested in keeping the war between Iran and Iraq going to ensure that these two potential enemies remained preoccupied with each other. This policy caused problems between the legislative and executive branches as Congress sought to curb the ability of the White House to support the Contras. Direct funding was made illegal through the Boland Amendment, which is 3 amendments written between the years of 1982 and 84, aiming to limit U.S. government assistance to the Contra militants. Funding ran out for the Contras in 1984, and a ban was placed in effect. In violation, senior officials of the Reagan administration continued to secretly arm and train the Contras, an operation dubbed the Enterprise, an arms smuggling network headed by a retired U.S. Air Force officer turned arms dealer Richard Secord. As the Contras were almost completely dependent on the United States military and financial support, the Second Boland Amendment threatened to break the Contra movement and led Reagan in 1984 to order the National Security Council to keep the Contras together, body and soul. That's a quote. No matter what Congress voted for. The Reagan administration was constantly on the lookout for funds that came from outside the United States government in order to not explicitly violate the letter of the Boland Amendment. Through the efforts to find alternative funding for the Contras, even though the efforts to fund the alternative funding for the Contras actually did violate the Boland Agreement. Ironically, military aid to the Contras was reinstated with congressional consent in 1986, a month before this actual Iran Contra affair broke. The first arms sales to Iran began in 1981, though the official paper trail has them beginning in 1985. Israel sent 96 American-made TOW missiles to Iran through an arms dealer. September 1985, 408 more TOW missiles were delivered. Following the second delivery, Reverend Weir was released by his captors. He was one of the hostages. On November 24, 1985, 18 Hawk anti-aircraft anti-aircraft missiles were delivered to Iran. The administration hoped to use the proceeds of arms sales to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. However, as documented by congressional investigation, the first Reagan-sponsored secret arms sale to Iran began in 1981, before the hostages had been taken to Lebanon. This fact ruled out the arms for hostages explanation that the administration sought to excuse its behavior. Part of the reason the Iran Contra Affair was so embarrassing when the story first broke was that as of spring 1983, American diplomats, as part of Operation Staunch, had been lecturing other nations on how morally wrong it was to sell arms to the Islamic Republic of Iran, and were applying strong pressure to prevent sales. The CIA was involved in cocaine trafficking in the 1980s. In 1986, a spokesman from the Reagan administration acknowledged that funds from sale of the cocaine smuggled into the U.S. had helped Contra rebels, but stated the smuggling was not authorized from the government or resistance leaders. In 1984, the United States officials began receiving reports of Contra cocaine trafficking. 3 officials told journalists that they had considered these reports reliable. Former Panamanian Deputy Health Minister Dr. Hugo Spadafora, who had fought with the Contra Army, outlined charges of cocaine trafficking to a prominent Panamanian official. Spadafora was later found murdered. The charges linked to the Contra trafficking were Sebastian Gonzalez Mendiola, who was charged with cocaine trafficking on November 26, 1984 in Costa Rica. In 1985, another Contra leader told United States authorities that his group was being paid $50,000 by Colombian traffickers for help with a 100-kilo cocaine shipment, that the money would go for the cause of fighting the Nicaraguan government. A 1985 national intelligence estimate revealed cocaine trafficking links to top commanders working under Contra leader Pastora, who had complained about such charges as early as March 1985, claiming that 2 political figures in Washington told him State Department and CIA personnel were spreading the rumor that he is linked to drug trafficking in order to isolate his movement. On December 20th, 1985, these and other additional charges were laid out in an Associated Press article, which included interviews with officials from the Drug Enforcement Administration, Customs Service, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Costa Rica's Public Security Ministry, as well as rebels and Americans who worked with them. 5 American Contra supporters who worked with the rebels confirmed the charges, noting that 2 Cuban Americans used armed rebel troops to guard cocaine at clandestine airfields in northern Costa Rica. They identified the Cuban Americans as members of the Brigade 2506, an anti-Castro group that participated in the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. Several also said they supplied information about the smuggling to U.S. investigators. One of the Americans said that in one ongoing operation, the cocaine is unloaded from planes at rebel airstrips and taken to the Atlantic Coast port, where it's concealed on shrimp boats that are later unloaded in the Miami area. On March 16, 1986, the San Francisco Examiner published a report on the 1983 seizures of 430 pounds of cocaine from a Colombian freighter in San Francisco. It said that the cocaine ring in the San Francisco Bay Area helped finance Nicaragua's Contra rebels. Carlos Cabezas, convicted of conspiracy to traffic cocaine, said that the profits from his crimes belonged to the Contra revolution. He told the Examiner he just wanted to get the communists out of his country. Julio Zavala, also convicted on trafficking charges, said that he supplied $500,000 to 2 Costa Rican-based Contra groups, and that the majority of it came from cocaine trafficking in the San Francisco Bay Area, Miami, and New Orleans. On April 17, 1986, the Reagan administration released a 3-page report stating that there were some Contra cocaine connections in 1984 and 1985, and that these connections occurred at a time when the rebels were particularly hard-pressed for financial support because aid from the United States had been cut off. The report said, "We have evidence of a limited number of incidents in which known drug traffickers tried to establish connections with Nicaraguan resistance groups, and that the drug activity took place without the authorization of resistance leaders." Also, in 1986, the Kerry Committee found that the Contra drug ring links included payments to drug traffickers by the United States Department of Funds authorized by Congress for humanitarian assistance to the Contras, and in some cases, after the traffickers even after the traffickers had been indicted by federal law enforcement agencies on drug charges, others while they were still under active investigation. From August 2018 to the 20th in 1996, Gary Webb's Dark Alliance series was published by San Jose Mercury News, claiming for the better part of a decade, San Francisco Bay Area drug rings sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood Street gangs of LA and funneled millions in drug traffics to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the United States Central Intelligence Agency. The drug ring opened the first pipeline between Colombia's cocaine cartels and the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles, and as a result, the cocaine that flooded in helped spark a crack explosion in urban America. To support these claims, the series focused on three men: Rick Ross, Oscar Danilo Blandon, and Norman Menezes. According to the series, Ross was a major drug dealer in Los Angeles, and Blandon and Menezes were Nicaraguans who smuggled drugs into the United States and supplied dealers like Ross. The series alleged that the three had relationships with the Contras. The CIA and law enforcement agencies failed to successfully prosecute them, largely due to their Contra and CIA connections. The Department of Justice Inspector General's report was released in 1998. According to the report's epilogue, the report was completed in December 1997, but was not released because the DEA was still attempting to use Danilo Blandon in an investigation of international drug dealers and was concerned that the report would affect the viability of the investigation. When Attorney General Janet Reno determined that a delay was no longer necessary, the report was released unchanged. 6 weeks after the declassified and heavy-censored first volume of the CIA report was made public, Inspector General Hitz testified before a House Congressional Committee stating that Volume 2 will be devoted to a detailed treatment of what was known to CIA regarding dozens of people and a number of companies connected in some fashion to the Contra program or the Contra movement that were the subject of any sort of drug trafficking allegations. Each is closely examined in terms of their relationship with the CIA, the drug trafficking activity that was alleged, and the actions the CIA took in response to these allegations, and the extent of information concerning the allegations that was shared with the U.S. law enforcement and Congress. And as he stated earlier, he had found no evidence in the course of the lengthy investigation of any conspiracy by CIA or its employees to bring drugs into the United States. However, during the Contra era, CIA worked with a variety of people to support the Contra program. These included CIA assets, pilots who ferried supplies to the Contras, as well as Contra officials and others. And he followed up with, "Let me be frank about what we are finding. There are instances where the CIA did not, in an expeditious or consistent fashion, cut off relationships with individuals supporting the Contra program who are alleged to have engaged in drug trafficking activity or taken action to resolve the allegations." It's also said that under an agreement in 1982 between Ronald Reagan's Attorney General William French Smith and the CIA, agency officers were not required to report allegations of drug trafficking involving non-employees, defined as paid and non-paid assets, pilots who ferried supplies to the Contras, as well as Contra officials and others. This agreement, which had not previously been revealed, came at a time when the allegations that the CIA was using drug dealers in its controversial covert operation to bring down the leftist Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Only after congressional funds were restored in 1986 was the agreement modified to require that the CIA stop paying agents who it believed were involved in the drug trade. Gary Webb was found dead from an apparent suicide with 2 bullets in his head in December 2004. Thanks for watching Capital Cannabis. Hope you got something to think about, because the CIA has been trafficking narcotics for decades. Peace. Catch you on the flip side.
Say, thank you and the money they're making, Wall Street money they're killing, sons and daughters, and they keep saying Wall Street wants to hit. Dow is up, your market's high, and we're tired of your life, 'cause we all know you do so smart, and you know you think you are, and you realize this is genocide. You're killing sons and daughters. You're making Wall Street money. You keep saying, well, Wall Street wants to hear. David, play. You out. He expects you to shout. Jump on, let's shout out. We are winning. He's making fuck you money, and he's killing sons and daughters. You keep saying, well, Wall Street wants to hear. Boy, you're right, and he pretends to be a newsman. He'll look you in the eye while he tells you right-wing lies, because he's nothing but a traitor. And he's making all that money, he's killing all your children. He keeps saying, well, Wall Street wants to hear. Obama's making plans with his Wall Street friends. He's just another politician. And the media is dying. They spread the news with lies while they're following the money. They're making Wall Street wants to hear. The tunnels up all night, he's swinging for the right, while he's counting all the money. And the media is dying, they spin the news with lies, while they're following your money. They're making Wall Street money, and they're killing your sons and daughters, and they keep saying louder what Wall Street wants to hear. They spread your news with lies while they're following the money. We're making Wall Street money. We're killing your sons and daughters. They keep saying Wall Street wants to hear